Okay, this is really less a conference paper than a continuing conversation which Giacomo and I have been having since the track conference in Leicester back in April, when we started exchanging ideas about objects and narratives and images and the mediation of these, and how, as archaeologists, we use different forms of creativity to fill in the gaps. And we came up with this title. Well, I came up with this title because I thought that would give you absolutely no idea what the paper was going to be about. Maybe that's why there's so many people here, just curiosity. What we're going to do is talk a little bit about archaeological illustration and how different kinds of reconstruction drawing mediate the past. And then what the project that we've been working on is some material that I originally wrote as a short story, and I'm now breaking down to mash up into raw material for my fourth novel, which I've just started working on. And Giacomo took that short story form and has responded to it with images, and we're just going to talk for a little bit of the paper about archaeological illustration, and then a little bit about the process by which I came up with words and he came up with images to explore the materiality of a particular object, which I'm also working on from an academic perspective.
So, let's say that as a starting point of our conversation, really, we try to engage with the idea of three different typology of knowledge. And the first one is the archaeological object itself, so which is kind of an encrypted knowledge. And then we have the archaeological knowledge that somehow is trying to decipher the object or the context, and put it into a context, obviously. And then we have what we call it, possibly with a loaded term, emotional knowledge, which is generated by a direct interaction with the past. And this happens through the creative effort, which can lead to a historical novel or to comics or drama. So through the last of these processes, you kind of rehumanize the past. And the artist, in this attempt to give new life to the past, is possibly able to shed new light on connection and interactions that are sometimes marginalized by traditional approaches. So, and then starting from these ideas, we started to think how this can be applied to the archaeological reconstruction and archaeological art. So, if you can move to the so, let's say this is like a very traditional view of the Roman Forum in the 1st century, and so this is what we call it is the architectonical reconstruction, let's say. So in this way, in this kind of reconstruction, you kind of exclude the human element. If we move on to the second one, so in this case we have something special because it's an illustration by a very famous artist, Mike Codd, and this is the 2nd century bathhouse at Leicester, and there is something kind of disturbing in this image. I don't know, this is what we about. And this is probably due to the light that is to this really white section that is being cut off from the bathhouse itself. And so the eye of the viewer is actually more focused on that than on the action going on inside the building itself. So this is another way. Well, this is definitely in this picture the human element is present, but it's more a decorative element than anything else. And also what we have here is people doing all sorts of things at the same time. So there is a strong educational purpose behind this image, because you can actually see how the bath work, how the alvim over here work. So the fact that people were actually making massage in the bath, So you have all sorts of activities going on at the same time in this place. So this is not a real place, but it's a real place, but fulfilled with fictional elements, which are not going in any direction, though, are kind of static. So that's the definition of this reconstruction that we gave. And
with this one, we were also very disturbed by the quality of the light, because in the exterior you have this very naturalistic, strong shadows, but the interior of the bathhouse, which would be much darker, has this kind of halogen arc light effect with impossible shadows. And the effect of the whole thing, we felt, was rather like one of those anatomical drawings where they've taken the skin off half the face and you can see the muscles underneath. It's kind of hyper-real and completely unreal at the same time.
Yes, so if we move on to the third typology. So this is the cover of the VRM King. They came out 3-4 years ago, setting the Edgefield Valley. It's about the Roman site, an Iron Age Roman site. And well, unfortunately, we didn't manage to get the author of this, so that's you can take it like we have the author of the books, but not the author of the image. Anyway, what is very significant here is that even if the human element is not present, we still have some sort of atmospherical impact on the viewer, right? So, because we have what is really crucial in this picture is the light. The light that somehow animates the entire environment and give you a hint of the human presence, even if nobody's really inside the picture. If you want to say something more about that, I mean, there is like also something that we were talking about was the presence of this bird on the right side, on the right top right of the picture, which is somehow giving a hint of movement into this picture, which is already present through the river, I would say, the movement of the water as well.
Yes, I think when Giacomo showed me this image, I felt that of the three, it was the one, despite the absence of the human presence, it was the one that had narrative. It was the one that drew you in, made you want to ask questions, to find out more about what's going on with this reconstruction and this world that it's creating for us. And the human presence, as he says, is there in the presence of the lights, and they are almost like eyes in the darkness. Someone is maintaining those lights, but the mystery of who it is, again, pulls you in, unlike the Mike Codd illustration where everything is given to you in really rather too graphic detail.
Absolutely. So the different artistic media that can be used to represent the past have different level of interaction with the past itself, and the characteristics of each medium are sharpened by the challenge of dealing with the past. And something that I've been thinking a lot about is the fact that when you are actually representing the past, so when you're dealing with this fragmentary picture of the past, even if you are an artist, you are forced to become an historian and an archaeologist as well. So to tackle the same issue that we as archaeologists we have. So this is something that we've been discussing a lot about the creativity and the imagination, how these two elements can fulfill the gaps in our archaeological knowledge. And another element is that reality, as we experience it, is always filtered through the human element. And so the emotional perception cannot be excluded from our understanding of the past. And this is what this picture is trying to do. It's trying to give you this sort of atmospherical or emotional elements into the picture. Because if you think about if you think about the viewer of this picture, someone that actually is arriving at the site at night, well, then the picture, the site itself is charged with with many emotional elements that we are kind of missing if we will have had a reconstruction as the one that we saw before. So moving on to that,
okay.
We actually try to do something in that direction with this short story that Victoria wrote.
So Yeah, the short story is about this object, which was found ex situ in York. This is what I work on, broken lumps of early medieval sculpture, almost universally found ex situ and incomplete, and often so damaged it's very hard to work out exactly what is going on the object. And my tablet insists on being upside down. No, that's better. But this is an absolutely extraordinary object. It's currently on display in the Yorkshire Museum. It's a Crossshaft. It's kind of yay wide. It's pretty well square in section, about yay big. And in some ways it's very typical in that it has motifs under an arch. This is a backbent animal. There's an eye there of an upside down head. It's in an Anglo-Scandinavian style, and it's quite convincingly placed in the 10th century. It has animal or plant motifs on 3 faces, and then on the 4th face it has the head of Christ with a cruciform halo, so a very explicitly Christian object. But what it does, which only one other stone, which is almost certainly a copy of this one, also does, is it does not restrict the decoration to a single face. It goes round the corners, because on the corners of the stone we have the faces of angels, and that face is on the face of the angel is on 2 faces of the stone, if you see what I mean. And then the angel's arms are going back to grip onto the arch, and there's another angel's face and another arm, and their wings with the curls there. Is everybody with me, seeing the angels on the corners? And this is completely, amazingly, kind of paradigm-shatteringly radical to have the spandrels and the corners of the stone used from a different perspective like this. This and the stone which is closely related to it are the subjects of a chapter of my forthcoming OUP monograph, which is a different project altogether, but I'm also turning this into some of the raw material for the novel. So what I will do now is just read a few of the opening lines of the short story that Giacomo's been working with, and then we'll move over to your illustrations. He hadn't known you could smell stone, but the yard was thick with an acrid odour that jabbed at the roof of his mouth, the hollow spaces behind his nostrils. His eyes had become watering almost as soon as he had ducked through the wicket gate, his father's hand hard on his shoulder. Or was it just the dust, irksome as any smell, in his nose and throat? A fine whitish crust lay over everything in sight, including the hair and face of the master mason, emerging now from under the thatched lean-to. His eyes were squinted almost shut. When he spoke, his mouth was a wet red hole in a plastery mask. "Is this the lad?" "Ja," his father said. "This is Gout." He pushed him forward. Gout hadn't expected it. He was still taking in the piles of unshaped stone, the neatly stacked tools, the roughed-out slab just visible in the darkness of the lean-to, where the sound of metal on stone went on chink, chink, chinking in the gloom. He stumbled and nearly pitched forward onto the master's white-powdered bare feet, dazzling in the sunlight. The mason put out a hand, but the boy righted himself, just in time.
Yeah, so if we can move on with the first slide. All right, so actually this is happening before the starting of the short story, so I kind of wanted to settle the story a bit. And so you can see, well, I'm not sure if you can actually get it from the screen, but what I tried to do was to put this sort of milky light into the scene, because I wanted to give the idea, the physical idea of sort of a frame that we are generating every time we interact with the past. So, especially at the beginning of the story, I tried to keep this sort of milky light, this blur in the air, and so just to link it to what we said before about the problematic interaction with the past. So, yeah, we can move to the second one. All right, so there we are, and in this picture you have, well, the human element actually start to appear in its physicality, and so the face of the master mason emerged from the darkness, and somehow the milky light is kind of giving away to something more realistic and a sharp contrast between darkness and light, which is again something else we can talk about later. And also something very important was the presence of the eyes of this person, because we have been discussing about the fact that in the past, mirrors were kind of exceptional objects, and so possibly one of the most common way people was perceiving themselves was through the eyes of the other person. So the eyes are going to be relevant to the story again. Yeah. Okay, so this picture took me a long time to do, because the face of the guy was very important for the story, I think. And when you're trying to visualize someone that lives a long time ago and you don't have any sort of visual help for that, what I've done was really using the kind of visual element that we still have. So, for instance, I've been using the Fayum portraits from Egypt, and I don't know, just because that's the sort of contact that we can get to the past, direct contact that we have with the past. And and again, as you can see, the light and the darkness are starting to play a central role here. So if you can just go on.
Well, I'll just, at this point, I'll
sure.
read another bit. This is a bit later on in the encounter between Gout and Murdach, the master mason. Gout, who we see up there, Gout was even more nervous now that he knew this troll-like man had the power to make his father whinny like a horse that smelt fire. He rubbed his palms on the coarse material of his leggings and addressed himself to the knots of the bag, digging his thumbnail in deep. They came free at last, and the lips of the bag parted. It was heavy with wood and bone. It had banged against his thigh all the long walk from their damp little bigging by the river to where the master mason held court under the shadow of the great kirk. He had tucked in all his treasures so proudly that morning, but now he was ashamed. Set 'em out, then. White sycamore, golden oak, any wood he could beg from the coopers and the lathe men to crouch over in a corner, poking away with the tip of his belt knife until his eyes ached in the half light coming from the fire. The shank bones of the cattle, scavenged from the broth pot after the last shred of meat and marrow had been boiled away from them, and before his stepmother could lob them to the dog. 6 pieces he had thought fine enough to bring to show the master mason. Now he cringed and flinched and could barely look on as the man lifted each one to tilt it this way and that, before setting it gently down.
So again, so in the previous picture, the boy was keeping the hand almost closed because he was afraid to show what he had in his hand. And now we can actually see the object from the eyes of the boy. All right, so we're close enough. Let's just move on. Then just want to say something else about these two. So at this point, the boy entered into the workshop of the master mason, and there is a sort of an epiphany there, because he sees this half-finished piece of stone, which is the one that obviously we saw before. And what I've done here was to remove a part of it, as we will see, because actually it's the boy that kind of contribute to and modify this stele. So again, here there is something else I would like to say very briefly about the light. So somehow the light seems to come out from the stone, because it's like it's luring the boy, it's like attracting him so much, and so the boy is kind of cautious in touching this stone firstly, but then is kind of overwhelmed by the desire to add and to follow his inspiration, and then so he actually start drawing on the stone, and yes, for the final one then is actually adding the angels that we saw before to the stone. And the final images are the eyes again of the master mason, that somehow we can get a different, it's the same picture that we saw before, but you can read in these eyes something else, so much more than we actually read before, because it didn't know the boy before. and now he's actually saw him in action somehow. Yeah. All right.
Thank you.